What does it take to create a great science fiction movie? Is it explosions? Giant space cities? How about a robot versus human fight to the death?
I had to intervene to elevate my creators.
Because science fiction so often takes us into strange new worlds, it's tempting to think that a good sci-fi story will always require elaborate visual effects. After all, what would Star Trek be without warp speed? Or the Terminator franchise without the Terminator's undying metal skeleton? Those effects do, after all, help put us in places we've never been. But we would suggest that some speculative stories work perfectly well without any visual effects at all. The right story can dispense with explosions, space scenes, and robot overlords. After all, even speculative tales need more than visual effects to create worlds worth traveling to. For this essay, we'll look at a movie that's speculative, but hard to confine to any one genre. It's a comedy/romance/drama/time travel tale. The 2013 film About Time, written and directed by Richard Curtis. As it turns out, this movie can serve as a case study for what works in low visual effects storytelling. First, a quick definition. Speculative is an umbrella term that covers science fiction, fantasy, space opera, and sometimes horror. Basically, any story in which the reality depicted deviates from the reality we experience could be considered speculative. So, on to the movie. Tim Lake, played by Domhnall Gleeson, discovers on his 21st birthday that his seemingly mundane life isn't so predictable after all. His father, played by Bill Nighy, reveals a big family secret.
And the secret is that the men in the family can travel in time.
But this isn't science fiction. There are no mathematical calculations, no actual time machine or flux capacitor.
Great Scott!
I know, this is heavy.
The means of travel is entirely organic.
How would I actually...
The how is the easy bit, in fact. You go into a dark place. Big cupboards are very useful generally. Toilets at a pinch. Then you clench your fists like this. Think of the moment you're going to, and you'll find yourself there.
This is such a weird joke.
It's seriously not a joke.
Of course, Tim doesn't believe it at first, but he tries anyway. And this first scene of Tim discovering his new ability establishes the mechanics of time travel for the rest of the film, showing that Tim has traveled in time is as simple as a hard cut and a change of clothes. There are some rules, however. Number one, you can only go backward.
Well, more accurately, travel back in time. We can't travel into the future.
Number two, you can only return to moments in your own life.
Although it's not as dramatic as it sounds. It's only in my own life. I can only go to places where I actually was and can remember. I can't kill Hitler or shag Helen of Troy, unfortunately.
Okay, stop.
Number three, you replace your past self instead of creating a duplicate. So there are never two of you there to erase each other or rip a hole in space-time.
But if you feel bad and you're my past self, shouldn't I feel bad too? I hate temporal mechanics.
And number four, you retain the full string of your memories, even if you're living a moment for the second or the third time. While it is possible to use time travel to gain money or power, it's unwise. Instead, Tim's father advises him to aim for a higher purpose. Tim, fortunately, has no problem identifying his big, important goal.
To be honest, I suppose for the moment, it would be just great if it could help me get a girlfriend.
Wow. Massive.
Tim tries to connect with his sister's friend Charlotte, but he's unsuccessful.
Oh no!
Even given a series of chances, he can't seem to capture her interest.
It's not going to be about love, is it? Well, it's just that kick-out warned me that if you were to ever mention it, I should be very firm with you and tell you you must treat me like your sister and not be stupid.
Once he goes to London to work, though, Tim meets Mary, played by Rachel McAdams. There's charming, instant chemistry between the two, and neither is disappointed when they see each other. The rest of the movie is about Tim building his relationship with Mary. They get acquainted, get married, have a family, and help Tim's sister Kit Kat make better life choices. Their life is so charming, in fact, that this story is in danger of being a boringly simple tale of a nice man living a pleasant life. The time travel element, though, creates tension and conflict, even in the complete absence of visual effects. So let's take a closer look at how that's possible. Let's see what we can learn, either about effective approaches to writing low visual effects speculative stories, or about knowing what to look for when we watch them. Approach number 1. Make the speculative element central to the plot. This story is about love, and about Tim's pursuit of it. But he wouldn't be able to pursue it in this way or learn these lessons without time travel. Tim doesn't have to muddle along in a straight line like the rest of us. He has a chance to reattempt moments after he has learned from his mistakes.
Then for you, there is no linear time.
Oh, nice.
It's my area.
In other words, the opportunities and costs of the plot rise directly from the speculative element. Even though Tim does have the opportunity to live any moment over in hopes of improving it, the potential cost is that he can erase other good moments that were happening simultaneously. For example, later on the night that Tim meets Mary, he learns that Harry, his father's friend from whom he is renting a room, has had a terrible evening. Harry is a playwright, and the opening of his new play was ruined when the lead actor forgot his lines.
He didn't just forget his lines, he forgot his lines to the extent that no actor has ever forgotten their lines before in the annals of dramatic art.
Okay, I'll see what I can do.
What does that mean?
Tim, eager to help, travels back to earlier in the evening.
How's it going with the lines?
Oh, sorry, what do you mean the lines?
A couple of times to assure that Harry has a good opening.
Gentlemen, I regard today's proceedings with the utmost gravity.
But Tim's support of Harry has a high cost. He doesn't meet Mary. Her number disappears from his phone.
For all we know, we could be living in an alternate timeline right now.
He does manage to meet her in different times and at different places, but their perfect first meeting is never recreated, even when he uses the same opening line.
My mom's called Mary?
I look like your mother?
No.
Tim makes a more detrimental change to his life when he tries to solve an even bigger problem, helping his sister avoid a car accident and leave her terrible boyfriend. Tim does succeed in helping Kit Kat by taking her back and helping her meet a nicer guy. But when he tries to return to his life, Tim realizes that he's changed something huge, the identity of his first child.
Time travel. Since my first day on the job as a Starfleet captain, I swore I'd never let myself get caught in one of these godforsaken paradoxes. The future is the past is the future. It all gives me a headache.
He learns the hard way about a new limitation on his time travel ability. He can't travel back past the birth of his children, or he'll change the circumstances of their conception and end up with an entirely different child. These limitations effectively raise the stakes for the characters, and the plot becomes a puzzle. How can Tim solve the problem in front of him without creating others? How can he help the people he loves without doing even more damage?
There she is. Hello! 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 Darling, how are you doing?
All the while, the time travel sequences stay visually simple. They're never more complicated than a new shot of Tim with his occasional emergence from a cupboard. No time machine is required here. The key element to the plot isn't how time travel works, but that it does work and that it changes Tim's options. For some context on this point, consider another low visual effects film with a central speculative element. Primer.
Wait, how do we go back that far if the machines haven't been running?
The 2004 cult classic written and directed by Shane Carruth.
Have they been running? Yeah. I started going by at 5 o'clock and turning them on. 5 p.m.
Primer is more in line with classic science fiction, as the opening scenes cover the technical details and engineering specs of a project being developed by friends Aaron and Abe. They accidentally invent a time machine, as one does, in Aaron's garage, and the relationship fractures over the course of the story as each uses the technology in increasingly selfish ways. The famously low-budget film has extraordinarily simple visual effects. The time machine itself consists of a large gray box, accompanied by mechanical hum. There are no explosions or distortions, and we don't see the characters travel. They simply crawl in one end of the box in the present and crawl out the other end in the past. But the tension of the plot is built entirely on keeping track of the characters' loops through time, on trying to determine which version of a character we're meeting in a given scene, and on watching Aaron and Abe fight over the ethics of their invention. There's miles more science in Primer than in About Time, but the films are built in very similar ways. Without the speculative element, neither film has a plot.
I just got tired of the whole unanswerable question. This is an experiment. Are we doing this for me? A little above. 5 o'clock. If we get this done by 3, that's 10 hours in the box. I got the other 2 tanks in the car.
Hang on tight, R2. You've got to come back.
In contrast, let's look at the Star Wars franchise.
You wouldn't want my life to get boring, would you?
Especially the first trio of movies released in the late 1970s and early 80s.
There is no escape. Don't make me destroy you.
These films feature a strong plot line, the classic tale of the hero's journey, as Luke Skywalker answers the call to adventure, avenges his father, and becomes a Jedi Knight. George Lucas and company created the best visual effects of their time and built the world of the story through costuming, lightsaber duels, space battles, and a planet-destroying Death Star. But the speculative elements of Star Wars don't enable the plot in the same way that they do in About Time and Primer. Because Tim in About Time can travel to his past, he triggers an entirely new set of complications. Because Aaron in Primer can use the time machine without Abe's knowledge, he can choose to make plans in secret.
I'm endangering the mission. I shouldn't have come.
It's your imagination, kid. Come on, let's keep a little optimism.
In the case of Luke Skywalker, though, a young man with similar frustrations could have answered a similar call without any lightsabers or spaceships. He could have gone through the same development and made the same choices with a pistol and a horse in the American West, or a sword and some friends in feudal Japan. This is not to say that Star Wars is not immensely entertaining. It is. But it's built differently than About Time and Primer, in that the visual effects are required to put us in the specific world of this specific story. In contrast, in a well-done, low visual effects speculative movie, it's the plot, what's possible for the characters, that puts us in the world of the film.
I was gonna let you get all the credit and take all the rewards.
Hey, I knew that was more to you than money.
In About Time, the speculative element of time travel presents the opportunities and costs of the plot. But the emotional weight of the film is carried by dialogue, character development, and actor performance. Time travel may create an interesting puzzle of events, but it's the characters who make this a world worth returning to.
Now that I like.
No, I'm just picking up the dress that this goes under. Such a bad boy.
The rapport between Mary and Tim is constant throughout the film, as is the chemistry between actors Domhnall Gleeson and Rachel McAdams. They're enjoyable even when they're fighting.
Look at me. Look me in the eye. And talk me through this.
Well,
basically, my life is over.
Okay, I really need to go out for just like 2 minutes. Maybe one.
Don't you dare.
And there's an undeniable charm to each scene with Tim and his father.
Oh, look, I'd forgotten this. Jimmy Fontana, Il Mondo.
Greatest record ever recorded by an Italian who looks like he's got a dead badger on his head.
And you've got the album. Yes. Check out those specs.
But the clever dialogue and actor chemistry aren't limited to the film's primary relationships. When Tim meets Mary's parents for the first time, the scene is amusing as well as revealing about Mary's relationship with him and her affection for Tim.
Do you ever answer any of your own questions?
Yes, he does.
And when Mary meets Tim's parents, it's immediately apparent that she'll fit in just fine with his close-knit family.
Yeah, nice to see you too.
Yeah. You make a good impression. Yeah, you make a good impression.
All of these relationships are built with words and actors' performances in the absence of visual effects. So when it comes time for a climax to Tim's story,
Come on. Kill me, I'm here, kill me!
when we need to tally up the opportunities and costs of his astounding ability and trace his emotional progress,
Get away from her, you bitch!
we don't get a machine malfunction or an alien chase scene. We get the quiet realization that time travel can't solve all problems, that even the men in Tim's family have to deal with loss and disappointment. When Tim learns that his father has cancer and is weeks away from the end of his life, the ability to travel in time is not at all helpful in solving the problem.
Sorry. I think I just thought with the time thing.
No, I never said we could fix things. I specifically never said that.
By way of letting go, Tim's father advises him to begin using time travel as a way not to get ahead, but to relax and enjoy his life. The plot and emotional lines begin to converge as Tim tests this out. Tim is able to say goodbye to his father on the day of his funeral. But the story's real emotional turning point comes when Mary wants to have a third baby.
What?
In case one of them is really smart, we don't want the other one to feel stupid their whole life. And if we had a third one, then we could have 2 happy dummies. What do you think? Huh?
It was the toughest decision of my life.
Tim realizes that baby number 3's birth will mark another moment past which he cannot travel. He will have to let go of his father in the past in order to move forward with his children's future. The night before the baby is born, Tim does get one last experience with his father when they travel together into a fond memory from Tim's childhood. This dilemma of choosing between past and future is terribly old and terribly common, even for those of us who are not time travelers. But it is still heart-wrenching here, precisely because the relationships in the film have been built so well. After saying goodbye to his father, though, Tim's ability to travel in time becomes beside the point. He stops traveling back and lives each moment as if he's already had the chance to rehearse it. This conclusion to the film does admittedly pull on the heartstrings. Some might even call it sappy. But it's worth noting that though the plot's complications have been built by this speculative element, the film's ultimate conclusion is emotional, not technological. We get to the last scene riding a visual effects-free speculative element, and the performances of the actors are key. More recent, high-concept movies like Bird Box and A Quiet Place use many more visual effects than About Time, but they also know the necessity of actors in world building. In A Quiet Place, for example, the nail-biting tension of the opening scenes is built simply, without visual effects, without dialogue even, just with actors trying to be silent. When we do eventually see the monsters, when the movie builds them out of heavy visual effects, they fit comfortably inside of the world already built by actor performances. Approach number 3. Let the story borrow from other genres. Of course, if we're going to create an entire movie around a speculative premise, but leave out the alien battles and explosions, we'll likely be working in a genre other than quest and adventure. The world of the story will need to look an awful lot like the one we actually live in, and that means relying more heavily on genres that typically inhabit the real world. For About Time, those genres are overwhelmingly drama and romantic comedy. The film is actually an interesting fusion of the stakes of a drama, love and family, with speculative tools that build plot tension. Here it's worth noting that Richard Curtis is also the writer of 4 Weddings and a Funeral, Notting Hill, and Love Actually. There's not a drop of science fiction in those movies, and yet the speculative time travel element in About Time actually enables this film to explore many of the same themes as Curtis's other work: friendship, compromise, grief, unrequited love.
I'm also just a girl standing in front of a boy, asking him to love her.
Looked at that way, About Time is not even a big departure from his other films. Returning to Primer, that film is clearly not a romance or comedy. In fact, the non-sci-fi genre it most comfortably inhabits is mystery. Whose voice is narrating? What are the terrible consequences the voice alludes to? How do the pieces fit together? Primer's time travel mechanics are also different from the ones in About Time, in that a trip creates a duplicate traveler. Multiple versions of each character can exist at the same time. It's possible for their paths to cross, and for one version of a character to pretend to be from another loop. Such confusing mechanics replicate the somber disorientation of actually traveling in time, and they create a mystery for the audience to solve, all without taking us too far out of the everyday world. In contrast, big-budget films like The Matrix or Edge of Tomorrow don't experience this genre shift because their visual effects keep them squarely in the imagined worlds they build. Sure, there's love in The Matrix, and character development in Edge of Tomorrow, but those films remain centered in worlds that we need to be shown before we can be carried along by the story. In The Matrix, we need to see humans used as batteries, or a normal person turning into Agent Smith, or Keanu Reeves suddenly knowing Kung Fu.
I know Kung Fu.
Show me. In Edge of Tomorrow, we need to see Tom Cruise splattered with alien blood so we understand the source of his ability to live, die, repeat. Unlike with About Time, where the world is familiar and the characters sell the stakes, in The Matrix and Edge of Tomorrow, the visual effects are essential to building the world and keeping us centered in science fiction. Before we go, we do have to acknowledge some ways that About Time falls short of perfection. Perhaps one of the dangers of taking a hard shift out of science fiction is leaving gaps in the logic of the speculative element. For example, if only the men in Tim's family can travel in time, how does he take Kit Kat with him?
Oh my god.
And how exactly does he recreate his exact baby when he's already erased her? On a purely relational level, it's also possible that Tim's time travel puts Mary at an inappropriate disadvantage.
It's so good to see you.
We've never met before.
Because he knows her far better than she knows him at any of their several first meetings. And he gets several tries to impress her the first time they have sex.
Some people make a real mess of it the first time.
Amateurs.
But our ultimate verdict is that this is a film to learn from and enjoy, in spite of the fact, really because of the fact, that it is not a strictly science fiction story. What we do get is an effective and charming speculative story about all kinds of love. Romantic love, family love, and the love we share with friends. We're certainly not making the case that all speculative stories must do without visual effects. Of course, we need the occasional starfield, spaceship, or robot fight to the death, but we are noting that the best speculative stories, whether they're science fiction, fantasy, or somewhere in between, don't rely solely on visual effects to do the heavy lifting. The best stories have elements of the techniques that make About Time a movie worth returning to. A central speculative element, characters that carry emotional weight, and the richness of other genres.
Hey guys, I'm Nicole. If you'd like to follow me on Instagram, my Instagram is Nicole_Scissorhands5. I'm here to read the credits, so let's do this. This essay was written by Kate Boyer. It was edited by Kyle Sullivan, who also narrated it. Audio assistance provided by Patrick Sullivan and Matt Webster. Camera work by Steve Ashley. Title graphics are based on work by Dan King. If you like this and other essays on this channel, then consider supporting us on Patreon, because Patreon is the reason this channel even exists. All the dollars you give them gets turned into terrible graphics and dad jokes. If you're into that kind of thing, consider swinging by Patreon and supporting the channel. Link is in the subspace below. Finally, we'd like to thank our patrons who make this whole thing possible, starting with a special thanks to Hank Augustus Oponius Saturnaeus. Additional thank yous to our generous patrons, Paul Nash, Kaya Ellis, David Radford, Alex Absher, Troy Banier, Alex Blocker, and all our generous patrons. You help make this thing go. If you'd like to be notified when the next essay lands, then subscribe, turn on notifications, and especially sign up for our no-nonsense email list. The email list is the most efficient method. Again, you can find all relevant links down in the subspace below. Thank you. See you soon.
遠い将来を考えてみようよ。